What if everything that modern man considers progress is nothing but the refinement of his own decay? What if our deepest thoughts, our so-called individuality, were merely echoes of an exhausted civilization that no longer dreams, only repeats its own demise? Throughout history, there have been thinkers who, instead of celebrating the supposed ascent of man, have chronicled his slow, inevitable descent into mediocrity. Nicolás Gómez Dávila, with his piercing aphorisms, is among them. His work does not seek to uplift, it seeks to strip away illusion. In Eccentricity and Decadence, he exposes the wretched state of a civilization that has exhausted its creative impulse and now feeds on its own corpse. He does not offer comfort, only clarity, which for the lucid mind is perhaps the cruelest burden of all. Our era congratulates itself on its tolerance, its technological advancements, its rejection of old hierarchies, yet it remains blind to the simplest truth. The modern world is not the triumph of reason, but the atrophy of the spirit. We believe we have escaped the chains of superstition, but in reality, we have merely exchanged them for subtler ones. Ideologies that flatten thought, distractions that fill the void, and a nihilism that, instead of confronting the abyss, festers in apathy. Gómez Dávila knew this well. Decadence is not an accident, but a necessity. Civilizations are born, flourish, and rot, not because they are misled, but because their very nature demands it. Man no longer rebels against the world, he conforms to it. His eccentricity, once a sign of vitality, of an aristocratic defiance against the common, has been eradicated. To be truly different, truly unique, is no longer possible. The individual is now a construct of collective desires, manufactured opinions, and interchangeable identities. In a world where every deviation is swiftly commercialized, where even rebellion is packaged and sold, what remains of the authentic self? Nothing but the illusion of choice in a wasteland of sameness. The modern man, stripped of true eccentricity, believes himself free simply because he is no longer bound by tradition. But this supposed freedom is an illusion, for he is now enslaved by something far worse, the tyranny of mediocrity. Gómez Dávila saw this clearly. True distinction, true intellectual aristocracy has vanished. Once, to be eccentric was to stand against the tides of vulgarity, to shape oneself in defiance of the masses. Now, difference has been reduced to a mere aesthetic, a marketable quirk, a shallow rebellion that ultimately reinforces conformity. The decay of civilization is not marked by catastrophe, but by comfort. Decadence does not arrive with fire and ruin. It settles in softly, under the guise of progress. The man of a decadent age does not struggle. He drifts. He does not seek truth. He seeks distraction. He does not yearn for the absolute. He is content with the trivial. Society, in its advanced state of decline, no longer produces individuals who challenge its core, but only those who rearrange its ornaments. The radical, the revolutionary, the so-called iconoclast, all of them play within the safe parameters of an exhausted culture, endlessly recycling ideas that once held weight but now serve only to amuse. The eccentric, in its truest form, is extinct. In ages of vigor, eccentricity was the mark of the superior man, the philosopher who dared to think beyond the given, the artist who refused to flatter his audience, the aristocrat who upheld values scorned by the rabble. But what place is there for such a man in an era where all values have been flattened, where culture has been democratized to the point of banality? The eccentric of today is a curated persona, a spectacle for consumption. The genuine article, the man who does not seek attention, who does not wish to be understood by the masses, who values his solitude more than their applause, has been erased. In the past, the eccentric man existed in opposition to the world. He was the shadow cast by a civilization still capable of producing contrasts, of distinguishing the noble from the vulgar, the profound from the trivial. But in an era where everything is leveled, where all difference is reduced to mere variations of the same mediocrity, eccentricity loses its essence. To be eccentric now is to be another performer on the stage of mass culture, another attraction in the carnival of irrelevance. Gómez Dávila knew that true decadence is not when society fails, but when it succeeds in eliminating everything that transcends it. The decline of the human spirit is not measured by wars, economic collapses, or political corruption. Those are merely symptoms. The real decay happens in the soul of man when he ceases to ask the essential questions, when he no longer seeks meaning but instead resigns himself to comfort, to entertainment, to the endless cycle of distractions that keep him from confronting the emptiness at the core of his existence. Modern man no longer struggles against fate. He does not fight the gods, nor does he attempt to carve his own destiny from the stone of adversity. He simply accepts the world as it is presented to him. He is a consumer of reality, not a creator of it. The idea of personal greatness, of an existence shaped by will and sacrifice, has been replaced by the pursuit of ease, of happiness in its most superficial sense. But happiness is a word that civilizations whisper to themselves when they no longer believe in their own future. If there is a sign that a civilization has reached its terminal phase, it is not violence or disorder, but the complete absence of higher aspirations. The decadent society does not fall because it is weak. It falls because it no longer desires to rise. Its institutions persist, its systems continue to function, but they serve no grand purpose beyond their own perpetuation. Art, philosophy, and politics become mere echoes of a past that is no longer understood. The eccentric, the man who once stood apart, has no role left to play except that of an entertainer, an oddity to be displayed, rather than a force to be reckoned with. The decline of civilization is not loud. It does not arrive with the collapse of empires or the eruption of revolutions. It happens in silence, in the slow erosion of thought, in the quiet suffocation of the soul. Gómez Dávila understood that decadence is not a spectacle, but a process, one so gradual that those within it fail to perceive its full depth. We do not awaken one day to find ourselves in ruin. Rather, we drift into it, lulled by the comforts of a world that no longer challenges us. The modern man does not yearn for greatness because he no longer recognizes it. His highest virtue is adaptability. His greatest talent, the ability to blend into the machinery of society without causing disruption. He is neither truly alive nor truly dead, existing in a state of passive continuation, where nothing is questioned and nothing is affirmed. He does not seek wisdom, he seeks validation. He does not desire truth, he desires acceptance. And yet, in the deepest recesses of his being, something stirs, a vague unease, a nameless anxiety, a sense that despite his comforts, despite his apparent security, something is terribly wrong. But what is wrong? He cannot say. He has been trained to avoid the question, to drown out its whisper with distractions, with trivialities, with the endless stream of stimuli that ensure he never faces the void. To do so would be unbearable, for he would see what he has become, a being without weight, without conviction, without destiny. A creature of the present moment, incapable of anchoring himself in the past or projecting himself into the future. He drifts because there is nowhere left to stand. True eccentricity is no longer possible because the world no longer produces individuals who could sustain it. To be eccentric required an internal world stronger than the external one, an independence of spirit that refused to be molded by the tides of the age. But who possesses such strength now? Who dares to live not as a reflection of society, but as a rejection of it? The eccentric of old did not seek approval, nor did he care for recognition. He existed on his own terms, guided by principles that did not require validation. Today, even rebellion is an appeal to the masses, a desperate plea to be noticed, to be given a place within the very system one claims to reject. The world that once produced true individuals, men whose eccentricity was not a costume but a consequence of their depth, has ceased to exist. What remains is a parody of distinction, where every thought, every action, every supposed defiance is instantly absorbed into the great machinery of sameness. The modern man, so proud of his autonomy, so convinced of his originality, does not realize that his thoughts are not his own. His ideas, his desires, even his discontent, all of them have been manufactured for him, pre-approved by a culture that turns even opposition into another commodity. Gómez Dávila saw that true individuality is impossible in an age that worships mass approval. The eccentric of the past did not seek recognition. He withdrew, he resisted, he created in solitude. But today every voice competes to be heard, every difference is reduced to branding, every insight is reduced to a tweet. Thought itself has been mechanized, reduced to fragments that circulate endlessly, stripped of the weight that once made them dangerous. The result? a civilization where no one thinks deeply because no one is allowed to be alone with their own thoughts. To think requires silence, but silence is now intolerable. It is in silence that man confronts his own insignificance, that he sees, perhaps for the first time, that his existence is without foundation. And this is something he cannot bear. The modern world has made solitude a disease, contemplation a defect. Instead, it offers a never-ending stream of noise, ensuring that man never has to hear the only voice that matters, his own. And so, he drifts. He fills his days with tasks, with entertainment, with the pursuit of goals that mean nothing beyond their immediate completion. He tells himself that he is free, that he is different, that he is making his own choices. But if he were to strip away the distractions, if he were to let the silence settle for even a moment, he would see the truth. He is not free. He is merely a vessel for a civilization that has long since abandoned its soul. The most tragic aspect of modern decadence is that it does not even recognize itself as such. A civilization in decline does not mourn its own fall, it celebrates it. It mistakes its exhaustion for enlightenment, its emptiness for liberation. It believes that by dismantling the structures of the past, it has freed itself, when in reality, it has only severed the roots that once sustained it. Man today is weightless, unanchored, drifting without history, without destiny, without meaning. Gómez Dávila understood this well. The decadent world is one that denies transcendence. When a civilization still possesses vitality, it looks beyond itself. It aspires to something higher, something absolute. But when it begins to decay, it turns inward, suffocating in its own self-referential emptiness. Instead of seeking truth, it plays with appearances. Instead of philosophy, it produces ideologies. Instead of wisdom, it chases after data, mistaking accumulation for understanding. The decline of the human spirit is not an external catastrophe, it is an internal surrender. The eccentric in a world that still believed in greatness was a prophet, a visionary, a reminder that there existed something beyond the immediate. He was not simply different, he was a symbol of what was possible, of a life lived according to principles rather than convenience. But today, there are no prophets, only influencers. There are no ascetics, only performers. There are no saints, only brands. The idea of standing apart has become impossible, because there is nowhere left to stand. And yet, there are moments, brief, fleeting moments, when one glimpses the full horror of this reality. Perhaps it comes in a moment of clarity, when the distractions momentarily fail, when the noise recedes just enough for the silence to emerge. It is then that the terrifying question arises. What if everything I have believed about myself is a lie? What if my thoughts are not my own? What if my very identity is nothing more than a reflection of the world I inhabit, a construct without substance? Most will turn away from this question, retreating back into the comfort of illusions. But a few, the truly restless, the ones who cannot unsee what they have seen, will begin to search. And it is for them that thinkers like Gómez Dávila wrote, not to offer hope, not to provide solutions, but to reveal the depth of the abyss, to show that, at the very least, one is not alone in recognizing it. But to recognize the abyss is not the same as escaping it. The man who glimpses the full extent of decadence does not suddenly become immune to it. On the contrary, he feels its weight more than ever. He sees the triviality of his time, the emptiness of its pursuits, and yet he is trapped within it, unable to return to ignorance, unable to reshape a world that has already chosen its fate. This is the burden of lucidity, to understand the sickness while knowing that no cure exists. Gómez Dávila did not write for the optimist. His words were never meant to uplift or inspire, but to clarify, to strip away illusion. He knew that modern civilization is not merely corrupt, it is terminal. There is no reforming it, no restoring what has been lost. The decay is not an accident. It is the inevitable consequence of a world that has exhausted its meaning. History is not an endless ascent, as progressives believe, nor is it a cycle that can be repeated at will. It is a slow, irreversible erosion, a process in which each age drifts further from its origins, losing strength, losing conviction, until nothing remains but echoes of a greatness that is no longer possible. And what of the individual caught within this decline? What of the man who still longs for truth, who still senses the absence of something vital? Can he live in a world that no longer makes room for anything beyond itself? Or is he condemned to wander as a stranger in his own time, out of place, out of step, incapable of belonging? The modern world does not tolerate those who refuse to adapt. It does not burn its heretics, for that would at least acknowledge them as a threat. Instead, it ignores them, isolates them, ensures that their voices remain unheard. The eccentric, the man who still clings to higher aspirations, is not persecuted. He is simply rendered irrelevant. His ideas are dismissed as outdated, his values as impractical, his longing for transcendence as delusion. In a civilization that worships the immediate, anything that reaches beyond the present moment is considered madness. And so, the modern eccentric, the one who refuses to dissolve into the collective emptiness, finds himself in exile. Not a physical exile, but something far more profound, an exile of the soul. He walks among his fellow men, but he does not belong to them. He speaks, but his words do not reach them. He searches for meaning, but all he finds are echoes of a world that has forgotten how to listen. This is the deepest tragedy of decadence. Not that it produces suffering, but that it renders all higher aspirations meaningless. Gómez Dávila understood that to think clearly in an age of confusion is not a gift, but a curse. The man who sees reality as it is, without illusions, without comforting fictions, does not feel triumphant. He feels alone. The price of lucidity is alienation. For once, one has recognized the sickness of an age. One can no longer take part in its distractions. He watches as others chase after empty pleasures, as they fill their lives with noise, as they mistake comfort for fulfillment. He sees it all and knows with unbearable certainty that none of it matters. What, then, is left for such a man? If the world cannot be saved, if history moves only in one direction, toward further decay, what is the point of resisting? Here lies the final, most difficult question. If nothing can be changed, should one still refuse to conform? For many, the answer is no. They surrender, not out of conviction, but out of exhaustion. To fight against the current is too difficult, too lonely. And so, they allow themselves to be absorbed, to become indistinguishable from the mass. They still remember, deep down, that something has been lost, but they no longer have the strength to mourn it. But there are a few, those rarest of men, who continue to resist, not because they believe they will succeed, not because they expect the world to change, but because they refuse to betray themselves. They do not fight for victory. They fight because it is the only way to remain whole. They carry within them the remnants of a vanished world, the final embers of a fire that once burned brightly. They know they will be forgotten. They know they will be ignored. And yet, they persist. To persist without hope, this is the ultimate test of the lucid mind. The man who refuses to conform, who resists not for victory but for the integrity of his own soul, is perhaps the last true eccentric. He does not seek disciples, nor does he expect recognition. He is not a revolutionary, for he knows revolutions merely replace one illusion with another. He is not a reformer, for he knows that what is rotten cannot be restored. He stands alone, not as a hero, but as a relic, one of the final remnants of a world that once believed in something greater than itself. Gómez Dávila did not offer solutions, because there are none. His work was not a call to action, but a call to understanding. To see reality clearly is to accept that history does not bend toward justice, that civilizations do not recover once their foundations have crumbled, that man is not on an endless path of progress, but on a slow, inevitable descent. Those who refuse to accept this will spend their lives in delusion, forever seeking answers where none exist. But those who do accept it, who truly accept it, find themselves in an unbearable position. What does one do when there is nothing left to be done? Some will choose withdrawal. They will retreat into silence, into solitude, living as quiet exiles within a civilization that no longer speaks their language. Others will continue to engage with the world, not because they believe in it, but because they take pleasure in the game, playing with ideas, exposing absurdities, laughing at the spectacle of modernity's self-destruction. But whether in solitude or in irony, the lucid man is always alone, and perhaps that is the final proof of decadence, that truth itself has become an orphan. There was a time when truth was revered, when those who sought it were honored, even if they suffered for it. Now, truth is merely one option among many, drowned out by the endless chatter of a world that has no patience for depth. To speak it is to invite indifference, if not ridicule. The masses do not reject truth because they find it false. They reject it because they find it irrelevant. And so, truth lingers, not as a guiding force, but as a forgotten relic. Something men once revered but now dismiss as impractical, inconvenient, or worse, boring. It is not that modern man has refuted truth. He has simply outgrown the need to care. What value does truth hold in a civilization that no longer aspires to greatness, in a world where comfort is the highest good and distraction the ultimate purpose? The masses do not rebel against truth. They yawn at it. This is the final stage of decadence. Not suffering, not chaos, but indifference. A civilization does not collapse when it faces hardship. It collapses when it no longer sees the point in struggling. The men of past ages endured wars, plagues, disasters, yet they pressed forward because they believed their existence served something greater. But what does modern man serve? What does he build toward? He has no gods left to worship, no ideals left to defend, no future left to construct. He is not weighed down by tragedy. He is hollowed out by apathy. Gómez Dávila did not write for this man. He did not seek to wake the sleepers, for he knew that those who have chosen blindness will never open their eyes. Instead, he wrote for those few who are still burdened with awareness, those who cannot shake the feeling that something essential has been lost. He wrote for those who are restless, those who refuse to be at peace in a world where everything sacred has been cheapened, where everything profound has been reduced to entertainment. To read him is to recognize the depth of one's own solitude. His words do not offer comfort, but neither do they leave room for despair. He simply describes reality as it is, stripping away the illusions that modernity clings to so desperately. And in doing so, he reveals the only path left for those who will not betray themselves: to endure, to think, and to refuse. To endure, to think, and to refuse. These are the only dignified choices left for the lucid man in an era that has abandoned meaning. He does not delude himself with false hopes of renewal, nor does he surrender to the comfortable lies that sustain the modern world. He simply persists, carrying within him the weight of an understanding that isolates him, but also fortifies him. He does not seek salvation, for he knows none is coming. He does not seek victory, for he knows history is indifferent to his defiance. He lives as an outsider, not by choice, but by necessity. Gómez Dávila's writings are the quiet murmurs of someone who long ago accepted this fate. His aphorisms are not weapons, nor are they blueprints for rebellion. They are observations from the last edge of history, reflections on a world that has reached the final stages of exhaustion. He does not offer solutions because there is nothing left to solve. The patient is terminal. The disease is irreversible. What then is left for those who see this clearly? Some will argue that nihilism is the only possible response, that, if the world has lost all meaning, the only rational choice is to abandon meaning altogether. But this is precisely the trap that decadence sets. It lures the lucid man into the same emptiness that has consumed the rest. To reject the world does not mean to surrender to its nothingness. One can refuse without despairing. One can withdraw without annihilation. One can lose faith in civilization without losing faith in one's own convictions. This is the final defiance. To think deeply in an age that glorifies shallowness. To speak truth in a time that has no ears to hear it. To live with purpose even when purpose has been stripped from the world. The decadent age demands compliance, but it also mocks those who resist. It tolerates all opinions, except the opinion that civilization itself has become irredeemable. The lucid man is thus left with only one path: to exist as a silent witness to decline, neither deceived nor broken by it. The silent witness does not seek followers, nor does he waste energy trying to awaken those who refuse to see. He does not preach, for he knows that words are powerless against a world that has chosen its fate. He does not shout, for he understands that noise only feeds the machine of distraction. Instead, he withdraws, not into despair, but into clarity. He becomes an observer, not out of indifference, but out of understanding that the tide of history cannot be reversed. Gómez Dávila did not urge resistance in the political sense, nor did he advocate for futile struggles against the inevitable. He understood that the modern world does not need to burn books or imprison thinkers. It simply makes them irrelevant. Thought has not been silenced by force. It has been drowned in triviality. In a time when every opinion is celebrated, no opinion truly matters. And so, the eccentric, the one who still values truth above comfort, does not waste himself fighting a war that has already been lost. Instead, he preserves what can still be preserved. But what, in an age of universal decay, is left to preserve? Not institutions, for they have long been hollowed out. Not traditions, for they have been commodified beyond recognition. Not even language, for words have been stripped of their weight, their meaning twisted to serve whatever narrative is most convenient. No, the only thing left to guard is one's own soul. To refuse modernity is not to hope for another golden age. It is simply to carry the last embers of meaning within oneself. To live as proof that not all men have surrendered. The decadent world does not need to be destroyed. It is already consuming itself. The task of the lucid man is not to accelerate its fall, nor to save it from itself, but to remain intact as everything around him disintegrates. This is the final test, to endure without illusion, to persist without hope, to remain standing when there is no longer solid ground beneath one's feet. The masses will not understand. They will continue their distractions, their rituals of self-deception, their endless pursuit of entertainment to avoid the unbearable weight of truth. Let them. The lucid man walks alone, not because he wishes to, but because there is no other path left. To walk alone is not a choice. It is the consequence of seeing too clearly. The lucid man does not withdraw out of arrogance or bitterness, but because there is no place for him in a world that no longer tolerates depth. He does not expect recognition, nor does he seek it, for he knows that the modern age does not reward those who think. It rewards those who amuse. The thinker is a ghost, present but unseen, moving through a civilization that has lost the ability to recognize him. Gómez Dávila understood this isolation, and he embraced it. He knew that the moment a man values truth above acceptance, he is exiled, not by force, but by irrelevance. But there is a secret strength in this exile. To be outside of one's time is not a tragedy. It is a privilege. It is to be free from the illusions that enslave the masses, to see the game for what it is, and to refuse to play along. It is to live in a world where everything is degraded and yet remain untouched by its corruption. But this path is not easy. There is no comfort in lucidity, no reward for those who refuse to conform. The modern world provides endless ways to escape reality, entertainment, ideology, distraction, but it offers nothing for those who reject these illusions. The lucid man stands at the edge of the abyss, fully aware of the nothingness beneath him, yet he does not fall. He does not seek escape, nor does he seek salvation. He simply endures. And perhaps this endurance, this quiet defiance, is the last act of true resistance. The decadent world demands that all men participate in its collapse, that they surrender to its nihilism, that they laugh along with its mockery of all that was once sacred. To refuse this is to stand against the entire momentum of history, not as a warrior, not as a revolutionary, but as something much simpler, a man who refuses to disappear. To refuse to disappear is the last dignity of the lucid man. He does not seek to save the world. He knows it cannot be saved. He does not try to awaken the masses. He knows they do not wish to be awakened. He does not hope for renewal. He knows that what has collapsed will not rise again. And yet, he stands, not in defiance, not in rebellion, but in quiet affirmation of something deeper, something older, something that the modern world has forgotten but has not yet fully erased. Gómez Dávila understood that true strength is not found in conquest, nor in persuasion, but in the refusal to be absorbed. The decadent world does not demand belief. It only demands compliance. It does not ask for conviction. It only asks for participation. And so, the final resistance is not to fight against it, but to simply exist outside of it, to think in a world that has abandoned thought, to value silence in a world that worships noise, to carry meaning in an age that mocks it. The masses will not recognize this strength, for they have been trained to see power only in numbers, in movements, in revolutions. They believe change comes through action, through force, through the reshaping of society. But the lucid man knows otherwise. He knows that all great civilizations die, that history is a slow erosion, that nothing built by man lasts forever. And so, He does not waste himself in futile battles. He does not seek to reverse the tide. He simply remains. And in remaining, he preserves the last fragments of a world that once was. Not in books, not in institutions, but in himself. He is the final archive of meaning, the last custodian of a wisdom that no longer has a home. He will not be remembered. He will not be celebrated. But he will have lived as something more than a shadow, something more than an echo of the time in which he was born. He will have lived as himself. To live as oneself, fully without illusion, without surrender, is the only true victory in a world that has already lost itself. The lucid man does not expect recognition, nor does he need it. He does not seek comfort, for he knows that comfort is the prize of those who do not see. His path is narrow, solitary, but it is his own, and that is enough. Gómez Dávila did not offer hope because hope, in the modern sense, is a lie, a promise that things will improve when in truth they will only decay further. But he did offer something greater than hope, the strength to endure without it. He did not call for men to dream of a new future, but to hold fast to what little still remains, to think clearly in an age of confusion, to refuse where others comply, to persist, not because the world can be saved, but because one's own soul still matters. And perhaps this is all that is left. Not a grand purpose, not a mission to restore what has been lost, but a quiet and stubborn refusal to vanish. In a time when everything is cheapened, corrupted, and forgotten, simply refusing to dissolve into the mass is an act of defiance. To carry truth, even if no one listens. To think, even if thought has no reward. To remain awake, even when sleep would be easier. This is not a message of despair, nor is it a call to arms. It is simply an acknowledgment of what is. Civilization will not rise again in our time. The world will not return to what it once was. But those who still carry the embers of meaning, those who refuse to be swept away, are proof that something greater once existed. And as long as they endure, even in silence, even in solitude, the flame is not entirely extinguished. So to those who understand, to those who still see, to those who cannot forget, endure, think, refuse. Carry the last fragments of truth within you. And if you have found something of worth here, if these words have resonated with you in the quiet spaces where doubt and clarity meet, then perhaps you are not entirely alone. Would you like to continue walking this path of thought? Subscribe, not to follow, but to remain connected to what is left, to what still matters, to what should not be forgotten.